People crossing a railway line near Doncaster. A young mother and two children died when they were hit by a high-speed train while using a footpath crossing the main line near Doncaster. The incident has renewed calls for British Rail and the government to look at safety standards for such crossings. This report now from Ian McBride.
Janet Smith, her 4-year-old son Daniel and a friend, 7-year-old Emma Bryden, were killed instantly when they were hit by the King's Cross to Hull Express. They were returning from Potterick Carn Nature Reserve when Emma's bike stuck in the tracks. Mrs. Smith's 6-year-old son David ran to the house of signalman Jeff Wright to raise the alarm. Only 450 yards of line can be seen from the crossing. With trains travelling at more than 100 miles an hour, it means Mrs. Smith had only 9 seconds warning before the train struck. Is 9 seconds enough to cross the track if a person's already started moving?
Yes, it is.
A slow walk seems to indicate it might take as much as 15 seconds.
There's only one track to cross at one time. There is actually a group of 3, as you will have seen in this point, but trains infrequently come in pairs.
The train was stopped at Doncaster and the passengers transferred to other services. It's now being examined by British Rail investigators at Neville Hill Engineering Depot in Leeds. The driver is being offered specialist counselling. He's said to be devastated by the accident. There are no bells or alarms here to warn of approaching trains. When the line was upgraded 10 years ago to take high-speed services, the safety of this crossing was reviewed, but British Rail found that it still met Department of Transport rules. However, the regulations are far more stringent on the continent. In France, no pedestrians are allowed to walk across high-speed lines. French National Railways have constructed bridges and culverts to allow people to cross in safety. But today at Bessaker, people were continuing to use these fateful lines.
It's the only way you can get across, isn't it, when you're hikers? You've got to, you know, if you want to carry on your walks.
I come through here 3 or 4 times a week, and I've never seen no bother with it.
There are more than 2,000 similar crossings in Britain. British Rail say they'd like to ban the public from most of them, but every time they try, they're opposed by walkers and local residents.
Well, the Transport Secretary, Cecil Parkinson, said today that the public and British Rail must share responsibility for personal safety when using pedestrian crossings. He said it was very difficult to cross a line with 3 children, all with bicycles. It's very hard to imagine a set of circumstances in which you could make that absolutely risk-free, he added.
After an accident near Doncaster, in which a mother and 2 children were killed. As British Rail continues its inquiry into the accident, politicians and train drivers are demanding an urgent rethink on the crossings. The tragedy happened last night at Bessaker near Doncaster. The victims have been named as 34-year-old Janet Smith, her son Daniel, aged 4, and his 7-year-old friend Emma Bryden. British Transport Police believe they were hit by the train when Daniel's bicycle became stuck in the tracks. Mrs. Smith's 7-year-old son David witnessed the accident but escaped injury.
Within hours of last night's accident, British Rail investigators were examining the scene. Today, safety experts from the Railways Inspectorate also arrived at what is one of the busiest stretches of the East Coast Main Line. 100 high-speed trains a day pass through the crossing. It lies between a nature reserve and a housing estate and is well used. Pedestrians have to decide for themselves when it's safe to cross. Once through the gates, they have to walk over 5 lines. Overall, the crossing is twice the width of a motorway. After coming into sight, it takes the train 10 seconds to reach the crossing. Although there are no warning lights or audible alarms, British Rail points out that there are clear warning signs on either side of the track.
This crossing meets with the Department of Transport regulations, and the signing, the fencing and the type of gate in use reflects that criteria. It is safe if the public obey the signs and the way they are obliged to use the crossing.
But British Rail is not entirely happy with this kind of crossing, is it?
I think it would be true to say that particularly where high-speed lines are concerned, we would prefer not to have them. They are here for historical reasons, of course. They are rights of way, and we periodically enter into discussion with local authorities or other groups who have an interest with these crossings, but naturally there are often objections where there are historically established rights of way.
The boy who survived last night's accident ran a quarter of a mile to alert the local signalman and his wife.
We was in garden, as we're doing as now, weeding, and they They come and shout at us. As far as we've lived here 30 years, we've never had anything like that on.
There was a sense of shock at the school attended by the children who died. 2 teachers had to go home because they were so badly shaken. People locally will no doubt be waiting more keenly than most for the outcome of the inquiry into last night's tragedy.
There have now been 3 serious accidents on the region's railway crossings this week. 4 people have died and a 5th was seriously injured. The incidents have led to calls for more money to be spent on improving safety at unmanned crossings. In Bridlington on Monday, an elderly woman from Middlesbrough died when she was hit by a local train on a pedestrian rail crossing. Less than 24 hours later at Hayborough near Immingham, an elderly man from Boston suffered head injuries when a car was struck on a level crossing. Then at Bessaker came last night's tragedy. Richard Ewart has this report.
A simple warning light on this pedestrian rail crossing at Woodlesford near Leeds means that people can cross the line knowing that barring a mechanical failure there's no danger of a train coming. It's already being said that such a system at Bessaker and Bridlington could have saved 4 lives. So now Labour's transport spokesman is calling for an urgent review of safety levels at all unmanned crossings.
Well, we all want to do everything we can to prevent such horrific accidents like this. I'm surprised that there wasn't some form of audible warning there, particularly when the crossing is used by so many trains, and children and mothers will want to go to a conservation area like that. I think the board now and the government should call in a review of all these crossings. Particularly there's some evidence from a review report recently that there's not all the amount of money available to do all the kind of warnings, and that should not be a constraint.
While BR admit they're unhappy at the number of footpath rail crossings, they have no general policy aimed at removing them, and closure is often complicated by ancient rights of way. The latest figures show there are still 2,200 pedestrian rail crossings in Britain. Last year, 5 people died using them. There are 7,170 road crossings. 5,500 of those have to be operated by the user. In 1989, there were 9 deaths involving road crossings. Often, as in yesterday's incident at Hayborough, local people have warned that crossings are potentially unsafe. And after last night's incident, the government has been accused of putting people's lives at risk to save money on improving all types of crossings.
You're once again indulging in your favourite game of using hindsight to try to pin the blame on somebody for a terrible accident. I think we should all wait and see exactly what happened and find out if there are lessons to be learned. But I think it's not right to leap to conclusions and start to talking in terms of would money have saved lives. I think that is quite the wrong approach. Let's find out.
Tonight, ASLEF, the train drivers' union, have called for urgent talks with British Rail over safety. They say, apart from the tragedy of the deaths, people don't recognise the trauma suffered by drivers involved in accidents. A spokesman said, quite simply, it's like sitting on a bullet.